It is finally time to show you guys exactly how I paint my Black Templar, and I have been painting Black Templar since the Black Templar was obscure as the Flesh Terrors and the Crimson Fists. And now, they are like the most popular Space Marines ever, and I wholeheartedly agree because they are awesome. And one of my favorite things about them is they don't have to deal with Intercessors and Assault Intercessors because us Black Templar players, we get our own version of those units, and it comes in the Crusader Squad. The Black Templar Crusaders are a combination of both Assault and normal Intercessors, and have a combination of Space Marine Scouts, Battle Brothers, and Lieutenants, which in Black Templar speak are called Neophytes, Initiates, and Sword Brethren. Cracking it open, it's 4 sprues of Black Templar awesomeness, and somehow I've only ever built 10 of these guys. I am dying to get this second box built and painted because Crusaders can be brought in squads of 20. Oh yeah. Black Templar can do Space Marine Horde mode. Each Marine can be equipped with a bolter, but really, a Crusader is never complete without the Emperor's finest chainsword and heavy bolt pistol. But it's nice to get these Black Templar style bolters, because if you get the Black Templar Combat Patrol, which is awesome, it comes with 5 Intercessor bodies, and if you swap their regular bolters for these fancy ones, they become, in my opinion, the perfect Black Templar Intercessors. And can be swapped into more Crusader squads if you have some more scouts lying around. I built up my Initiate body. These differ from normal Intercessors in that they have a little bit more greebling and rivets, and they have tabards and belts that wrap around them. For my Crusader, I glued on the sheath chainsword and the arm reaching to pull it out of its scabbard. Then I attached the heavy bolt pistol, which is actually a little bit bigger than the old bolters that the Tactical Marines carried. For the head and shoulders, I actually don't use the Black Templar specific ones that come in the Crusader box. I find that the raised symbol is actually harder to paint, and the Black Templar transfer sheet is amazing, so I substituted the normal Intercessor's plain shoulder pad, which by the way is part number 69, and I clipped off a regular Intercessor head as well. Usually I glue this on, but I decided to stick it onto a painting handle. I have plans for this head later on. For now, I'm going to move on to further decorating my Marine. Initiates after each battle gain badges and battle honors, so I like to load each and every guy down with as much stuff as I can. I added a few more purity seals and a shoulder shield, which in my opinion, every Space Marine should have one of these to make them look that much more medieval. My Initiate's power armor is looking spiffy, and now it is time to do my little personal touch that I do to all the members of my Crusade, and that is to put skulls on the backpack. And these are not the skulls of their enemy. Even though that would be very grim and dark, the Black Templar are incredibly hateful, mean, and xenophobic, so they would never do anything that would even slightly honor their enemies. Instead, those are the skulls of this particular suit of power armor's previous owner. To show respect to their fallen battle brothers, they take the skulls and permanently nail them to the power plant so that they can crusade eternally. And now that I'm thinking about it, I would love to do like a diorama of a chapter keep, like my Black Templar chapter keep, that has the suits of power armor that have finally needed to been retired, and they're just covered in skulls. Ooh, might have to save that idea for later. To add these skulls, I used the jawless heads from the Citadel Skulls box, and I superglued 2 of them down to the power plant. I use superglue for convenience, as I need to drill into the heads and I don't want to wait for the plastic glue to properly dry. I made a dent with my hobby knife in the forehead of each skull that I'll fill with sewing pins. These are just the thing for scale nails. I took my hobby pin vise and drilled into the heads. I like to be random with the orientation of these nails. I have them all sticking out at crooked angles. Then I clipped the pins with wire cutters, picked them up with my tweezers and dipped the ends into a drop of superglue and then slid them into the holes. I have done this hundreds of times now. In fact, I know I have done it at least 172 times because on this Marine, I used the last skulls from my second box of Citadel skulls and I'll have to buy another. Now the Black Templar are bad. Like they're bad guys. They're the bad guys of the good guys. But in one aspect, their organization, they're kind of a little bit better than the rest of the Warhammer Imperium universe. In Warhammer, if you have a pulse, you're sent to the Imperial Guard. If you're a War Orphan, you're sent to the Adeptus Sororitas or the Tempestus Scions. If you're a Psyker, you're either fed to the Emperor's chair or turned into an Astropath. And for Space Marines, it's usually about the same thing. Oh, you want to be a Blood Angel? Well then you better have been born on Baal Secundus and then take part in the Angel Fall ritual, which takes place on the 3rd quarter of the 2nd trimester of the 13th week with your subway punch card ready. Everything is very predetermined. But the Black Templar aren't like that. The Black Templar don't have a strict organization, so people can just show up and say, I want to be a Black Templar. And if you can pass whatever trials that particular crusade comes up with, you will be placed into a Crusader squad, and you will be trained by an Initiate, and you will fight alongside the Adeptus Astartes. And that is kind of cool. There is no fate but what we make ourselves. Terminator 2, Judgment Day. For my Black Templar bases, I have them in an earthy, rocky landscape. To make these clip faces, I use pine bark nuggets. I found a piece I liked and then I sanded one side of it flat so I can superglue it down to the base. I filled in the rest of the base with cork so that his feet are on level ground, and I smoothed out the rest of the base with some milliputts. Then I sprinkled on some small pebbles, medium grit and fine grit sand, sticking it down with wood glue. I find wood glue holds a little bit better than white glue. I stuck down my Marine with a generous amount of super glue, and my Marine is ready for paint. Now, before I get to painting this Black Templar, my Black Templar, I want to talk a little bit about my Black Templar color scheme. Actually, I want to head the comment section off before I am inundated with comments about how my Black Templar aren't Black Templar, they're gray Templars. And yes, in fact, they are gray. I would argue though that that looks much better than true black. Black is a really tricky color to use because it's the end of the spectrum. It's all she wrote. Often Black Templars, like the way Games Workshop paints their Black Templars, you kinda only get the silhouette. But I want more than the silhouette. I want to see the volumes and the shapes inside of their armor. I also have my Templar fighting on a very bright sunny day in a desolate landscape, so I feel like they are being beaten by the sun, so it makes sense for them to be just a little bit brighter, and that's just how I like them. And speaking of ultra bright lights, I think it's kind of smart to think about lighting. Yes, they do look pretty gray under the incredibly bright LED make you go blind studio lights that I have here to paint under, but in my dingy living room or the poor lighting at the friendly local game store, they look quite a few shades darker, so they look proper Black Templar. So with all that said, it is finally time to paint this sucker. To get my Templar Initiate all painted up, I started with a black prime, followed by a Zenithal of white paint, really blasting them from above. Now to get the black onto my Templars, I have a custom recipe of contrast paints that I use. It's a mix of about 40% Black Templar, 20% Leviathan Blue, and 40% Lamian Median. I find that all these colors work together to give me armor that is visually interesting while also being very dark, and I give every part of the model a once over. Now the other major element of my Templars is their loincloths and shoulder pads. I thinned down Skeleton Horde contrast paint and put this on, tinting the Zenithal highlight. Then I thinned down some Wildwood contrast paint that I put over all the leather, like his holster and belts, and I carefully put this over his shoulder pads, quickly wiping most of it away from the raised areas so that my shadows have a tint of brown. Now a ton of the model is done. Anything left white I put Nuln Oil over to shade the recesses in between the chains and his Imperialis. Now it's finally time to use some actual opaque paints. One of the reasons I like this scheme so much is that simple washes and contrast does 80% of the work for me. I put tan paint onto my palette and I highlighted all the purity seals. Then I dry brushed the skulls so that they have a gradient from dark brown to light tan. I reinforced the shadows on their brows with my Wildwood and then doing a final highlight of a tan bringing up their faces and teeth. To finish off these parts, I hit them all with a final highlighting of white paint and I put my tan color over his knee. I randomly paint a checker pattern on some of my Templars' knees to make them more unique from one another. And I used Skeleton Horde and Wildwood to darken these. And while I was finishing off all the tan stuff, I sponged on more tan to give his dirty shoulder pads a nice texture. With my Templars, I like to work in colors, finishing all of one color before moving on to the next. And the next one is going to be red. I mixed red and black and base coated all of the red things, his purity seals, the rim of his shoulder pads, which is technically not canon, but for my Crusade it is, and I put red onto the checkering on his knee and his shoulder armor. Then I mixed up a red with just a little bit of black in it to do some highlights, hitting about 50% of the red surfaces that are facing upwards towards the sky. And then finally a highlight of pure red, putting this over only about 10% of the details. Now that all of the red is done, I am moving on to the yellow things. On this guy, it's the opposite checkering on his shoulder shield and his bolt pistol, but I like to switch it up a lot. Some guys get a lot more yellow than red, and other guys get more red than yellow. I base coated these things and then shaded them with glazes of Reikland Flesh Shade, which turns the yellow a rich orange color. And while I had yellow on my palette, I mixed it with the red to get a slightly orangey bright red, which I used to do a final tiny highlight on all the red things. Now for his chainsword. Usually there's no exposed handle, but for this guy there is. I paint all handles across my Crusade a purple magenta color. Now it's time to go back to that beautiful Black Templar decal sheet I was talking about, and what I love about it is the variety. Each Templar for my Crusade has unique heraldry, so I like to mix and match between all the different colors, patterns, and shapes of Templar crosses. For this bad boy, I picked crosses with skulls and one that has a red border. I let them soak for a minute in my wet palette and then slid them into position and using Micro Soul and Micro Set, poked and prodded them into perfection and then crushed them flat with a damp wad of paper towel. Once they were dry, I covered them up with satin varnish because the plastic decals are too glossy. But you know it's never too glossy. That's right, our Patreon. Over there we have a fresh terrain set every single month, and this month we have the Dark Elf Encampment. soar through the air in the Marauder, and then set up camp with the Pleasure Tents, Arena Walls, and the Pleasure Portal. This is a set of characterful terrain pieces and wonderful accessories for the discerning elf. Now it's time for that head. The reason I wanted a plain Intercessor head is because I turned it into a canvas to paint another Templar cross. I use white paint, a sharp brush, and reasonably steady hands to carefully paint the symbol over his face. The Templar cross is pretty easy. I would not have the patience to paint on, let's say, the Raven Guard crow over his face. With that done, I want to show you guys a trick I like to do. If I'm going to have a helmetless head, I like to clip off the neck of a helmeted head and glue it somewhere on the mini. I think it adds some fun storytelling that this guy has temporarily removed his helmet, but it's close by. I found a Space Marine head I liked, and then I base coated his face with a beige color, and then glazed magenta over it, and then washed it with Reikland Flesh Shade. I like to make my Templar faces very color saturated because so much of the model is dull tan and black that the face really stands out. I mixed more tan paint and white paint into my beige, layering and highlighting until his face looked reasonably human, and then gave him gray hair, making it darker on the sides and using my dry brush to stipple white on top to give it some texture. Then I peeled him off my paint handle and glued him down using plastic glue. I like plastic glue for stuff like this because it gives me a little bit more time to play around with what pose I want. I am very nearly done with my initiate. The only things left to do are the base obviously, but now I do the chip pass. I've been slowly refining my Black Templar color recipe, and I find waiting till the very end is the perfect time to do the metallics. Then I put silver paint on my palette and sponged this on. This goes over all the hard parts of his armor, and that means it goes over a lot of the red, yellow, and tan too. This has the added benefit of catching more on the corners and edges, so it ends up being a little bit like an edge highlight, bringing more attention to the shapes of his armor. I painted this onto his nails and dry brushed this over the metal chains and weapons. Now for the base, and for my Templars, that is simple. It's Vallejo Earth and Pro Acryl Olive Flesh. I thinned down the earth color a lot and then sprayed this over the zenithal on the base. It splashes onto his feet as a bonus, making him look more natural in his environment, and once that was dry, I dry brushed the base with olive flesh to bring out all the details in the sand. And although some of you will disagree, my Templar are dark, so they look very striking standing on light colored bases. I painted the rim of the base using Apple Barrel Gloss Black paint, and he is looking sharp. I now have another Crusader to add to the ever-growing horde. Man oh man, does this guy look really different to the ones I painted in high school. I no longer use any of the same paints, any of the same colors. The only technique really that's shared between the two is the decals. And it's not even the same decals because Games Workshop has updated those. As of today, right now, this is exactly how I paint my Black Templar, and I love it. But you know what? It will continue to change over time. I have another Crusader that I painted. It's the same Crusader, and I painted this one a year ago. The new one does look a little bit different, and in my opinion, a little bit better. And I'm gonna continue to experiment and to change and to refine, and I will never reach the perfect Black Templar, because for me, the fun is in the collecting and the painting and the trying things out, and less about the overall collection. I've really been enjoying painting all sorts of different Space Marines, and this episode was a little bit indulgent because I'm probably gonna be referring to this video a lot moving forward painting my own Black Templar, but let me know in the comments below what chapter of Space Marines would you like to see me paint next. Thanks for watching.